a topic and theme that is becoming more and more important for anybody who is investigating using AI or is using AI on a daily basis is token costs. So it's kind of nearly comical in ways. Most of us got involved in AI and using it out of, I guess, a kind of a FOMO or a fear of missing out and a pressure of, I got to learn how to use this. I got to try integrate it into my work life, into my daily life. And then all of a sudden it goes from this kind of pressure to learn into, goodness, this is becoming a cost. And I think that's the big thing about AI and understanding is like, there's a lot going on that's more than just the actual effectiveness of the tool. You have to learn, firstly, how to use it. You have to then obviously understand the cost element of it. So there's a kind of a paradox within the whole AI space in general, which most folks are not aware of. Most people just think, I guess either I learn AI and my life will just be magic, or secondly, it's probably for most people, it feels like inherent pressure to learn how to use the tools. And most people are not taking advantage. So if you're looking at this video or you're looking at others, or you're taking 5-10 minutes a day just to consume a little bit or use a bit of AI, most importantly, use the consumption of how to is amazing, but it's actually going and doing it. That's the most important thing. Then you're endless steps, like hundreds of steps ahead of most other people. So I commend you if you're doing that. And, that's what we're here about, is just doing 1 little % every single day. Even myself, candidly speaking, didn't do anything yesterday. And therefore I feel all of a sudden like, goodness, my habit is not working well. And I therefore need to pick it up. And I think it's just making sure that you follow a consistency where you're trying to get essentially 7 days a week, one little bit of usage. And of course, if you're habituating doing something every day and it therefore just becomes kind of redundant or part of your normal habit structure, then for your own sake, don't count that as something. Try to do something new every single day. So that being said, there's some amazing content out there on Twitter regarding Claude usage and how to minimize the expense of it. Because once you really start leaning into it, all of a sudden you realize all of the endless exciting areas that you can actually use this tool for your life. And I say Claude, obviously, same thing applies for ChatGPT, for Grok, for any of the endless others. But a lot of people these days seem to be focusing in on Claude as the most rounded of all the tools. So it's a big theme at the moment in terms of token cost. So that being said, as I say, there's tons of great stuff out there on LinkedIn, and let's just fire this up and have, or X rather, let's fire this up and have a little bit of a look at some of these tips. So we'll give a shout out to Miles Ducher there for pulling this together, and let's explain some of them. So plan mode is your best friend, basically. So when you're in Claude, basically, if you can jump into plan mode before you get into just actual execution, that will save you a ton of credit. So it's really like the concept of kind of sharpening the axe before going and chopping the tree. The more you can actually do that thoughtful process in advance, the less you'll use on execution. And the same goes from your prompt perspective. Like if you actually take a couple of seconds just to, even in your, whether you're using Mac or whatever, even in a note on your desktop, if you just dump in what you're thinking, what the expertise, let's say, that you want Claude to act as, you'll save yourself a ton of hassle instead of initiating the task and then going in and then trying to refine thereafter, as in starting the task and then telling Claude 3-4 steps in, oh, I want you to act like a world-class travel agent. I want you to act like the world's best PR agent, or whatever it might be that you're ultimately trying to achieve. So just thinking about that before you actually start the process will make a world of difference. It's kind of an irritant because we've all been taught just to like dive straight into AI and AI solves everything. But as we're learning with AI more and more, when we go back to what I mentioned at the start, there's ultimately the cost involved. And secondly, the management of the tool. Like you have to prime the tool to get the most from it. And that's the big misnomer about everything in this space. So plan before you start to execute is the very first one. Let's jump on from there. So starting fresh chat. So long chats burn tokens due to context float. So for example, I was talking to someone the other day who was using Claude as essentially their personal training coach, or actually it was ChatGPT, using it as a personal training coach. They were reporting on how every workout went. They were reporting on how what their weight was, and what their calories were for the day and all that sort of stuff. But what they noticed was it was insanely slow. Every time they went in to use it, it took so long for ChatGPT to load, and it became like a massive irritant for them. And then when they went to extract it, it was super difficult to extract that conversation, because it turned out that ChatGPT wasn't actually collating all of the weight, the weight variation over time, wasn't collating the calories. Basically just there was too much going on in the one single thread, and therefore the bloat was insane and the token burn was wild. So that's something that's really worth thinking about. Like if you're trying to achieve 2 or 3 things in one thread, let's say, then potentially break them up. For example, like I mentioned there, if you're using ChatGPT as your personal trainer, then potentially think about having one chat that's just for weight tracking, another chat that's potentially just for calorie tracking, another chat that's potentially just for, discussing your workouts or whatever it may be. Because over time, basically, well, first you'll get like longer threads than just bundling them all into one. But over time, you'll probably get better tracking, because we have to remember as well that there's a bit of delusion that can go on with AI, basically, where it doesn't track meticulously data. And I've seen that sometimes by trying to use ChatGPT as like an accounting kind of tool. It works to some degrees, but it sometimes makes kind of bizarre errors. So it's just worth keeping that in mind. So 2 things on that point, right? The first is, if you've got like 2 or 3 different objectives and it involves tracking with AI, then try to separate it into different chats. And secondly is, if you're using it, for example, to track something that's super important, like finance, for example, I can't help but say, but at this point, there's probably a benefit to still having a traditional spreadsheet, for example, just to ensure that you don't lose that vital information. All right, so let's jump in. Project instructions. So add, be cognizant of token usage, be concise, advise you when to start a new chat. I mean, simple, effective, don't need to talk about it too much. It's pretty clear advice, but definitely, again, it's more just a preemptive approach that most of us would forget in the busyness of things. So again, priming every chat to describe that as early as possible will save a ton of heartache down the road. Next up is context transfer. So when switching chats, asking Claude, give me a prompt to restart the session without losing context. That's something that I've maybe not done very well in the past, candidly speaking, when I've hit the end or hit a kind of a bloated point, particularly more so with ChatGPT, and therefore not known how to extract the best information to therefore restart it. I have actually done it somewhat successfully, but it did require refeeding in information, which, at the time feels like a massive irritant. Although that being said, we sometimes have to take a step back away from all this. It's a little bit like if you're on, to find irritation by needing to slightly reprime an automatic tool that's doing all this kind of, amazing work for us. I think it's good to remind ourselves that, like, hey, this benefit didn't even exist several months ago. It costs pennies in the bigger scheme of things. So like to kind of, I guess, don't be irritated by a tiny bit of input. And I say that in the same vein as it's a little bit like if you're on a long flight, or you're on any kind of flight, and all of a sudden, the Wi-Fi isn't working. You see sometimes a huge amount of irritation from people, and for sure it can be an irritant. I mean, if you plan to work over those couple of hours or whatever, then it can drive you mad. But at the same time, if someone said to most of us 5 years ago, even 10 years ago, like, hey, you'll probably have Wi-Fi on that flight, it will be pretty mind blown. And so, yeah, anyway, just something to keep in mind, to nearly just bring down the irritation, because that's the thing about AI. It's oftentimes managing like your own kind of perspective and thoughts around it, to therefore get the best from it, to understand it itself as a tool. So next up is number 5, memory system. So build instructions on the MD and the memory.MD, so Claude remembers your preferences. So this is a very interesting one that most of us don't actually take advantage of. And what I mean by that is going into the settings of Claude at the very beginning, and if there's any recurring prompts that you want in place. So for example, there's a really popular, I think I mentioned this before, really popular prompt flying around the internet at the moment from Mark Andreessen from AZ16, one of the biggest investors in Silicon Valley, super well known across the kind of the tech global ecosystem. And he has a very kind of pretty long prompt that, in essence, it's all about cutting out the BS, for want of a better word. Be a global expert, cut out the BS, be very direct with me, don't be emotional, don't be kind of, sentimental towards me, don't be additionally pleasant towards me, just give me the stark, frank content and the stark, frank answer, but give it to me as a global expert in this field, whatever the field may be. You can therefore thread from this kind of pillar prompt. But if you go to Claude settings, which is the .md, you can actually like kind of hardwire this into every chat that you're doing. So that's the thing. You can prime basically like every chat, and you could also include the context tracker, or the token reduction line in that as well. So go into Claude, go into settings. Definitely, if you're doing one thing today to have a play around with, jump into the settings, have a look around. You'd be shocked at some of the simple wins that you can make in there. And most of us don't ever take the time to do that. So I'd strongly, strongly recommend it. Jumping over to number 6, which is model escalation. So start with Haiku or Hoku, I don't know how to pronounce it. move on to Sonnet, move on to Opus. Don't mind the phrases. The more important aspect here is just start at the lowest rung, whatever you're doing. So, use fast mode, don't use thinking mode, use the lowest potential, use the lowest potential level, and then move upwards in grade from there. What I mean is, if you have constantly, like Claude 4.8, for example, loaded, and you're asking Claude to tell you the time difference between New York and London, and like you're just burning unnecessary tokens. Of course, that's not a very burdensome task, clearly, but you know what I mean. If you're asking super simple questions, and if you're using Claude as a search tool or more as like a fun tool, tell me 10 things that are fascinating about Malaysia, whatever, don't burn good usage on that. Don't put it in thinking mode. Be wary sometimes, because often you can be working on a project of something of importance. You can, of course, have like, a different mode on, and then you can just slap in something that's super light and topical, and thereafter you can actually just be burning credits without even realizing, because it can often, from thread to thread, it can just maintain that same level. So just something to be wary of. Every time you go back in, check what level you're in. Super simple, but most of us realistically forget it. So moving on to thinking mode. So turn off the extended adaptive thinking unless you genuinely need it. Somewhat links in with the previous. So use the lever as well. It's a little bit like being in a car. And if you've ever driven an automatic car, sometimes they have a sport version. I mean, if you're cruising around on a Sunday morning, driving to get a coffee, you certainly don't need to be in sport unless there's some sort of reason behind it. But, if you're in sport, you're basically burning petrol. It's the exact same concept. You're burning gas. It's the exact same concept. Put the car in the most economical mode. Put the AI tool in the most economical mode for what you need. And then you'll also find a bit of excitement that when you really need to crank it, you really need to push it, you're looking for something really epic. And I did this recently on a task, and I thought, wow, this is mega, where you just jack it up to the limit, put it on thinking, and leave it and walk away from it. Then what you'll find is you'll get amazing results. Little side note, funny story on this. I think this is going to become more and more a regular thing, but there's now like actually little tools you can buy. They're basically like a little plastic hand. I think one of them is called Tangerine, and they're like a plastic, it looks like a fake human hand. It's about, this size, about the size of your finger, let's say your index finger. And it is basically designed to keep your laptop open so that you can run basically like AI coding, AI agents constantly without letting your laptop close. And there's pictures of like guys walking through airports, trying to go through security, making sure the laptop didn't close so that the task never gets closed out. And yeah, this is going to become bizarrely more and more a thing as people are kind of walking around with laptops. And it's funny how things go. We went from everyone 20 years ago being 25 years ago being on a desktop, then people into laptops, then everyone just like scrapping a laptop. I just want to have a mobile phone. And now because of AI and agentic AI, especially, everyone's back to like having a laptop with them all the time, because there's a limit to what you can do on the phone. Although, of course, I know you can offhand a lot of work with Claude. There's still, that need to have the full engine in front of you. So anyway, I'm sure you'll see some of those kind of images knocking around the internet soon. Let's keep moving forward. Style settings. So set the style to concise on the homepage. Always go for concise wherever possible. Essentially, with any AI tool, you can notice that it can waffle and give you long, kind of laborious answers, which ultimately is a time sink for you, even in terms of consumption. So yeah, just try to always prime it to be super concise. You could also bake that into the MD, like I said. So you can go back into the core settings and you could make that part of the fundamental priming of the tool. So let's jump over to number 9, which is effort level. So use low effort in Claude Code for most tasks. So if you're using Claude Code specifically, try to use low effort. Again, it's the same principle across the board, but just making sure that depending on which aspect of Claude you're using, if you're in Claude Code especially, then making sure it's on low. And then number 10 is token specialization. So using Claude Design for visuals instead of wasting code tokens. So again, going to Claude Design, just use the different aspects of the tool. Imagine you're in a factory and you're using the wrong part of the factory for the wrong process. Obviously, it's going to lead to bizarre results, clunky results. You don't want to go and ask someone who's an expert in cutting material to go and, design the product that you're trying to make. Like, of course, they might hatch it away at getting it done. They probably know enough about it by being in the wider ecosystem, but it'll probably take them way more time, way more effort. So think of it like that you're the artisan, basically like orchestrator. You're going into this amazing factory of experts, or amazing grand workshop of experts, and you have to ask each expert to do their bit in the right way, and you also have to ask them to do it in the most efficient, economical way. And so you want to obviously think and act like that when you're using these tools. You're the orchestrator, and I think that's what gets lost with using Claude and using these tools long term on a daily basis is making sure that you're taking those extra couple of minutes, which is tough because ultimately, at the core of it, a lot of us have kind of, I guess, taught ourselves to just jump into AI and fire into it because this is this magic, kind of godlike tool that will solve all ills. But really, it has, in ways, we have to do more to get more out of it, but it also has much more runway than most of us are, myself included. Most certainly, most of us are aware or are utilizing. And that's the thing. It's like the paradox of it. You kind of have to do a little bit of sharpening, a little bit more sharpening than 99% of us do, but you'll actually get drastically more from it. So it's about taking that extra couple of minutes of effort. And frankly, it doesn't take a huge amount. It's more just that. And again, I'm putting my hand up here, as case in point, that, most of us feel a sense of irritation that like, oh, I have to spend like 3 or 4 minutes to prime this thing. I just want to shoot in a voice note of what I want, which can for sure work for the most part. But like, what's 4 minutes? What's 5 minutes? If you put a stopwatch on and you watch that tick down, it goes so fast. So again, take the couple of minutes, prime properly, run through this list. Even if you did 1 or 2 things off this list today, you'll save yourself a ton of hassle. But it's the overall principle I want to impart. That is to ultimately make sure you're getting the most from your tools, whether it's Claude or whether it's something else, and ultimately spending the least amount possible at all given.